Today we embark on making a huge city map, the largest, most detailed city map I've ever made, and definitely in my top 3 maps I've ever personally created. We're going to talk through the how of it, discussing everything from the initial approach to dissecting the details into the many techniques I would use to make the specific areas, to diving into the many new tricks I would discover along the way. On top of this, we're going to talk about my feelings and perspectives about the actual process, specifically about the time it was taking and the time it ultimately took, which was about 9 hours total originally and is maybe up to 11 or even 12 hours. This is much longer than I would usually spend on a map, but more notably, it's much longer than I had planned. This meant I was often feeling daunted by the task ahead and at times was really feeling demotivated. So figuring out ways to speed up my output while making sure the map still looked really good and keeping myself in positive spirits and wanting to keep working on the map were both major aspects of this map making process. So while the production principles and the progression of the map are the primary thing we're going to talk about, learning or knowing how to make a massive city map is one thing. Actually being able to motivate yourself to sit down, plan it out, put pen to paper, and then just continuously work on a map hour after hour after hour, keeping the quality at the same high level is another thing altogether, and something I wanted to highlight in this video. Overall though, I feel some of the most pride and satisfaction towards this map that I've ever felt in my days creating D&D content, so I would say every second was 100% worth it. If you do want access to an 8K rendering of this map or any map I've made, then they're available individually on my Etsy store, or you can get access to all of them on my Patreon. And thank you so much to people who have bought them or signed up to the Patreon. Jumping into the actual map making process, we would, as always, look at our reference town on the world map and spend time cutting out the outline of the coast. Standard. Beyond this, as our desired city was going to be a much larger location, really planning it out from the beginning was crucial. Our approach wouldn't be so standard though. Instead, we'd partly plan the map by editing the world's map version to be something more desirable to create. As it stood, the world map version was all one building type, and in general, I avoid making single mono-designed cities where the whole map looks pretty samey. So we'd yeet out some of the boring, overused blue buildings and scatter in a few other architectural styles. This divergence away from the nation's standard building design would be narrativized by making this more of a trade city which has international influences. This was a decent start to the blueprint process, but the next step would be to district up the city so we could have lots of little areas, each with unique designs and aesthetics. A good blueprint for the different districts. And like I said, this place is going to be like very large. If we look here, it's definitely one of the largest cities on the map, and having a good diversity or a good plan for the districts is going to be really important. And that's what we've done here. And they are a little bit abstract. You know, we've said farm and markets and Elvish 1, Elvish 2. And we need to figure out what those mean specifically. This district segmentation wouldn't just denote distinctive pockets, it would also break up the map making process into much more manageable chunks. So during its creation, I was never trying to complete the entire map. I was only ever focused on finishing the district I was working on. These easier to achieve goals, these checkpoints would become my saving graces whenever I was getting overwhelmed by the massiveness of the map. With the planning phase over, it was time to place stamps, and as I often am, incarnate stamps would act as the inspiration. Ooh, I don't mind. Let's actually use these pirate docks because they're fresh, they're new, they're different. So I've been starting to do a bit more like elaborate dock systems, and I think we can definitely do that here. Let's actually try to like play around with some of these new ones in the sense of like, you know, maybe connecting them like this. Yeah, I like that the sizing difference is coming in a bit. Yeah. So we have these like long walkways, and then we're sort of connecting up these like different sort of. Ooh, this is great. I am a big fan of this. And we can chuck this on the map, right? So this is just 3 docks, kind of boring, whatever. Yeah, like that. And then we can sort of connect it with a longer dock like this. Cool. As I went, I would do a dock design I've been getting into a lot lately, which is making elaborate sprawling dock systems that extend well into the water. I think these are both fun to make, but they also look a lot better than a lowly single dock limping out into a large blue abyss. Especially if you have quite a big harbor or bay on the map, filling it with docks can be a great way to make an otherwise vacuous empty patch full of life and flair. Spearheaded by the great minds in chat, this dock creation would lead us to noodling up some narrative for this here city. city. This is less a trade city to me, and I think we can actually kind of go the other way where like, maybe this is a bit more trade and we have these bigger ships. I think this could be more of a navy city. This is the center of Silvervale's very prominent and significant navy. That's what we're gonna go for. This lore would actually end up leading to a quest, which as per usual gets its own video, but for our map creation purposes, it'd plant a need for a military/navy center somewhere, which we'd conjure up later. As we ditched our aquatic form, grew legs, and migrated from water to land, I'd make a quick decision. The question is, how big are we gonna make these farms? You know, like how big are we gonna make these buildings? And I feel like the answer is small. We should make them small. This would have enormously far-reaching consequences because whatever size these buildings were, all other buildings, trees, roads, everything on the map really would need to be proportioned around them. Admittedly, all this had been somewhat established by the dock system, but these first farm buildings were the true determining factor. This is because things like docks, ships, storage areas, etc., these can be absolutely massive or quite small, so the size isn't as deterministic as a standard one-story house or just a regular building. This small sizing would lead to the entire map becoming comparatively way more jacked and huge than I was intending, turning what I thought would be quite a big city into a steroid guzzling fiend. And it wouldn't be until I finished this district when I'd realized this. I might have diddled myself a little bit by making this as small as it is, especially because farms, you can kind of expand farms quite freely. And I haven't done that. Whoops. Okay, well, yeah, well, you know, you live, you learn. Now, I could have spent the 10-15 minutes it would have taken to resize everything, and if this was really too much of an issue for me, then I would have. And I 100% suggest undoing your work, accepting the mistake, and taking the loss of time in the short term to save yourself the time and effort in the long term, something I've done many times before. In turn, I knew I'd need to A, mentally prepare for a much longer investment of time and effort, and B, employ sporadic map-making methods that'd save on time. Two things I'd do somewhat well. With this, let's move on from this internal dilemma to actual map making. As far as farm district is concerned, I'd use a classic technique I've been using a lot lately, where I have varying sizing clusters of 1 to 6 building, place a communal patch underneath them, then I connect it all up with roads. An approach which results in a nice spread out town. As I said, I've used this a bunch recently, and I explain it more in depth in other videos, like my one on making a peaceful farming town. And personally, it's really cool to see techniques that I've been improving on and refining over the last few years, and specifically over the last 8 months, being something I am now much more comfortable with and can really effectively employ when I need to. This district isn't anything groundbreaking or new for me, but it's an exemplification of the techniques and knowledge I've accrued while making maps for my sandbox campaign, which slaps. I love that. Before we'd buy, sell, or simply browse for wares in our market district, I'd throw something on the map to add a little zhuzh. So let's actually put a fence down. I think that could be like an interesting thing. You know, it just divides up this section a bit. And as I've been saying, I definitely want to make these a bit more districts. And I think like having this walled off even just a little kind of adds to that. I think we're going to actually like wall off all the districts. I think that can be sort of like a feature of this place generally. With the idea of walls dividing up all the cities becoming a prominent feature throughout the city, I wanted to make sure we had a narrative rationale for them. Sweet. So I guess like one question is like, while I like the walls, my question would be like, why do they have walls? Like, why are they segmented? And maybe, you know, if this is sort of a navy hub or whatever, maybe they could be a little bit panicked or a little bit concerned about like invasion, right? The main city can be penned off a bit, and maybe we actually can chuck gates down for these ones. Maybe the farming place doesn't need the gates. Maybe it can show that they're just not being protected as much. But yeah, I think we can play around with that sort of idea a bit. Moving on to Old Market Town, and we'd get to something that'd truly be a difficulty throughout much of the city's creation. I always find the problem with cobblestone is it just like kind of looks a little bit whack, and I just don't know, like when it's with grass or dirt, it always just comes out a little bit whack, and I don't really like understand why, and I don't know how to solve that. Like I've never been able to sort of naturally make it sort of look good, and that's definitely a me issue, but as I am the one making the maps, that is sort of the most relevant person to have the issue. For me, stone streets are a kryptonite of sorts. I've attempted them many times before, but I've never been able to make them look like I'd want, which is simply a nicely stone street. More so, they always look way worse than dirt roads, which is why I rarely use them. But I was very much committed to using them on this map and wanted to ensure some of the districts would use stone roads, so this was something I'd need to figure out. Before this though, I would start with noting previous issues I was aware of and would need to keep in mind. Firstly, I found that if you do the same semi-winding road design that we use for dirt roads, it just looks kind of weird for whatever reason. Issue number 2, which is pretty closely related to issue 1, is the road's intersection and interaction with the ground texture next to the roads always looks off. So experimenting and try to figure out which textures work best under the houses next to roads and how to meld these two textures together would be something I'd really need to focus on. The last difficulty I'd need to work around is because the building stamps are all at different and somewhat odd angles, you aren't able to have a road then have a bunch of buildings that all face the same way connecting to that road, something which exists in basically every town and city in the world. The best solution I've found to this so far is placing them all in a block together where it'll still have these weird gaps and be massively asymmetrical. The way around this is just using the same stamp over and over again, something I don't do because it makes the map look, well, repetitive. I wouldn't really crack the code on this map, and I certainly wouldn't on this district, but I would get closer to a solution which I really like later in the piece. The approach I would go with for our market district would be purposefully designed even straight roads that intersect at equal angles. When it came to texture, we would put dirt inside the blocks instead of grass or a different stone, then the buildings inside these blocks would be connected to the roads with dirt paths. All of this looked fine, but I knew for future districts I'd want to improve upon this, which I would, and I'd later come and fix these areas with those techniques. Spoilers, the solution is nature. I'd also create our titular market, which is another area I feel like I've never fully nailed, although this is one of my better versions of it, where I went with a full cobblestone look, scattered markets around, then cut out some grass pockets for trees. The district was then topped off with a small manicured park, which consistently looked pretty good, so that was easy. At this point, I'd been going for 2.5 hours, and while I was happy with what we had done, the amount of work we still had to do was certainly a little overwhelming, and I was starting to feel bogged down by the enormity of the map making ahead. To shake it up, I'd purposefully try creating something I'd never done before on any map, in the hopes to electrify myself and bring back a sense of eagerness, which worked well when I created a large walled and gated walkway. Yeah, I like having this like long extended corridor where it's like, you know, very sort of diversified. Not diversified, like divided. And yeah, is there like gates? Elven gates, yeah, these are, these massive elvish gates are interesting. Yes, these are perfect as well. This is exciting me, which is good. I wanted to be excited again. I feel like, as I've been talking about, I'm feeling a little bit like lost in the soup, not 100% sure what to do. And this is definitely something that's sort of like galvanizing me quite a bit. More than this, to really ride the proverbial cerebral ship that is my psyche and have me clear sailing in the seas of self-assurance, I would speed run building a district. Just knock out a portion of the map so the empty space was less empty, but also less spooky scary. To do this, I'd go back to a style I was much more familiar with. But I think maybe I can go back to sort of my old classic, which is less districts and more sort of just lines of houses that sort of go along the side. Let's do a bit of the old style. Let's weave it in as well. This alternate style of lining the roads with houses rather than having pocket neighborhoods like our other dirt district would also be a way to make these two districts visually different from each other. After only 10 minutes, I would have this district finished and the map was looking much more filled out, instilling within me not just a greater sense of confidence, but also the vigor and vim I needed to straddle and ride our future districts to completion. And we're almost 3 hours in. I thought I would be able to get this map done in about 3 hours. Oh, what a dumb fool I am. But that's okay. Feel good. Like I said, just sort of knocked out a district real quick. And feels good. I bring all of this up because when making maps or homebrewing in general, managing your own expectations and motivations is really important. D&D is for fun, and if you accidentally make the DMing process too much for yourself, then it can become a burden. And instead of enjoying the process of making game assets, you feel beholden to an abstract goal you set for yourself. The two classic responses are begrudgingly grinding through and just straight up quitting, neither of which are optimal solutions. Now, situationally, these might be the best solution. However, we're here to talk about option 3, where you enjoy the challenge, find joy in the process, begin to be actively excited to engage in a project beyond your original scope. Giving yourself quick, easy wins can be massive for putting you back on track in terms of progression with the project, as well as reorienting the process back towards feelings of enjoyment and fulfillment, something that is crucial for keeping motivation up and you just feeling good, always a desired goal. So for me, zip zap zopping a district out in 10 minutes using a style I was super comfortable with was that perfect galvanizer, especially as we'd moved to a district I knew design-wise would be much more of a challenge, the first of our Elvish districts. Luckily though, this would be made easier by the fact that we would actually have a large amount of lore we'd use as a foundation. So I'd lean on this a lot to help facilitate my ideas for this district. So the Elven Section is the grandchild of an Elven king, but the Elven kingdom ceases to exist centuries ago. The leader has his estate there. This Elven leader employs orcs as his troops because he knows how fierce. Okay, I think maybe this could have been the original city down here. And maybe what could have happened is it's like, say, Silvervale. Before they became like unified, this city sort of got acquiesced. Maybe this was like a duchy. And this Elvish area down here is actually like the remaining semblance of the duchy which existed before. And although like the duchy's sort of been dissolved because they've sort of now exist in a larger nation and like these cities aren't independent, they're sort of one unified place, they are maybe still recognized as the official duke of this area, and maybe like the governor of this city is like the most powerful person in the city. They're a duke and they don't have the same level of power, but they hold on to it. And I think that's maybe it's a little bit different than they ceased to exist century ago. It's more of a like the title is now less important. This would evolve to the district being run as an independent nation of sorts, and in turn we'd have it be much more fortified and filled with the same wall walkways we created before. But this was more than just narrative. I also wanted to do this because, to be honest, I don't really like Elvish stamps and avoid using them whenever I can. Something you can see by the fact that even though this is the second largest city in a nation that uses this Elvish stamp architectural style, I've been using entirely different stamps throughout. The Elvish buildings are a little bit limited. Like, unfortunately, it's one of like the few stamps which is just sort of like quite, there's just not a ton of them. Like, to say it simply. Yeah, it's just kind of a bummer. I do really like the stamps though. I just wish there was more of them and they were a bit more diverse. So this isn't the biggest issue and we'd obviously make it work. As we progress, soon enough, we'd be rolling back onto the question of what texture goes below the houses and what would we use for the actual roads. As this is a fancier, more established district, I figured concrete under the houses and fancier roads would work. In hindsight, I should have tried a few other textures for under the houses, but of the ones I tried, this was the best and it looks okay. Maybe. We'd also connect the doors of the houses to the main roads with less refined paths, and I don't think this looks great. But at least it broke up the grey slab nature of the concrete underneath. So it looks better, I suppose. This isn't a surprise to me though, because going in, I knew making this district look nice and pretty was gonna be a struggle, and while we learnt some new tricks to make it look better than past iterations of the same thing, moving forth, it's definitely a style I need to continue experimenting with. One of the things I would use to make it look better though is a somewhat recently learnt technique, adding plazas and gardens throughout to ensure that there is a lot more visual diversity. I'd also add a little orc encampment down the bottom, which would be for the orc militia that are the private army of the Duke here. This was unsurprisingly by far my favorite part of the district to make. Overall, Elvish District 1 was the hardest district to make, the one I felt the shakiest about the whole time. But I think the double wall walkways are cool, and I think it's the best I've ever made an Elvish district or city look, so we absolutely take those wins. With all of this said, when it came to Elvish District 2 Electric Boogaloo, it may not blow your socks off to know that I'd go for a different approach. Okay, I had an idea for this area. I think we're gonna do the Elvish area in the styling of this. And I'm actually, you know what, while I'm feeling maybe a little bit okay about it, I feel like the idea's in my head, but I'm gonna do the neighborhood style. And I think like that'll be a nice way to differentiate these two places. But also because this style is a lot faster for me to make, and I'm able to create it in a way which covers a much larger portion of the map. And after Elvish Dukedom took almost an hour, I was keen to slip and slide through a district with the pace of a fast car going fast. This district was basically created the exact same way as our farm district, but this time I was using Elvish buildings. Ah, how very cool. I went with some of the same features as the other dirt districts, but I also wanted them all to have a little of their own vibe. So the green crops scattered around or the extra dock systems are some things I would place here. This way, these three districts would all have similarities, but would all have variations that make them notably unique. This choice is one I'd make across all the districts. I wanted them to have some crossover with each other and some things that were completely unique. One of the benefits of this is it's perfect for visual storytelling. When it comes time to create lore or build narratives or improvise some histories during a session in the location you have made, the interplay and relationships these places can have can be inspired by the visual elements you created during map making. As we turned our attention to the incredibly intelligently named main city district, I'd have a real chill and nonchalant response to the map making ahead. Main city, fuck, this main city is gonna be huge. I didn't mean to make it this big. Because of that, we're gonna have to think of some like smart techniques to make it less daunting for ourselves. What those techniques are gonna be, fuck, I don't know. So this behemoth was less Gary Oak level girthy and a beast a mere mortal like me could attempt to tame. I'd do what I'd been doing consistently, and I split up the area into smaller, more palatable pieces. The first segment would be what the city is known for, its navy base. Like any good Roman military-minded individual, we'd start by immediately walling it off from the rest of the city, following this up by placing down the docks and roads, then going back to the classic of this map. More walls, this time using palisades just to change it up slightly. It's interesting to me that like walls have really become the theme of this place, and it was definitely not my intention, but it's like that's just kind of like one of the things where it's like, I don't know, sometimes it just develops like that. Sometimes it do just be developing like that, and you gotta roll with it. Well, you don't have to roll with it, but I'm choosing to roll with it. I'm choosing to be flexible and cash. Choosing. And it's a good choice. With the foundations in place, the specific building style needed to be agreed upon, and you'll never guess what I chose. Or maybe you will, we'll see in a second. Basically, as this navy is a foreign legion-inspired thingamajig with members representing it from all the different nations, we'd segment this segment even further, filling it with pockets of infrastructure from the various nations which you can find across the continent. Taking this segmentation idea to the next level, something we'd do quite a bit more when it came to the rest of the main city district. With the earth doing a few frisky pirouettes, a new stream dawned, and with it, it had turned my attention to the big bulk of the main city district. I placed down a huge grid system which filled most of the empty area. I also placed down large tree avenues bisecting in the center for something a little different. But before we really started go-go supersonic racing, I needed to figure out the intention going forth. The second half of this project, the second half of the city, is very much going to be focused around like, can we do sort of big sweeping infrastructure that isn't super time consuming but still looks good and detailed. The name of the game here was Shock and Horror More Segmentation. Specifically, we'd splice together regular blocks made up of houses with unique blocks which would be home to something individualistic and very cool, such as a market or a plaza or a workshop block, and so on. These were the exact same principles we'd utilize when putting the park and market in the market district or the gardens in the Elvish Dukedom. This idea by itself was pretty solid, but I wanted something a little extra. I think maybe these buildings could be fancier up here, and it kind of, we can have maybe a bit of like a social hierarchical system where like up here is fancier, nicer buildings, and down here can maybe be a bit more working class. And that could be like another thing we can integrate just to bring a little bit of narrative. And even though the districts themselves kind of are that narrative, I think we can have that sort of micro narrative here where like this is much more farming, this is sort of just a bit more of like a regular town, this elvish town. You know, this is like a market in a city area, sort of the independent kingdom over here, the naval base. But within this section, there can be sort of that hierarchical divide, which sort of just goes up. Pretty easy metaphor for anyone to read. This would lead us to creating an area which is maybe my favorite of the map, and was a totally new experience for me. I would create fully walled off properties that have gardens. The blocks closest to the elite would all have hedges and get a block to call their own. Then the second row would be split in two and would be slightly smaller properties divided by fences. When it came to the decoration process, I would use the vibrant green grass to really have these elite properties pop on the map. This would also demonstrate that their grass and land is better taken care of than all the regular plebos that live in the other parts of the city with all their lame-o less green grass. We spent quite a bit of time giving each property a special adornment and temperament, and to further the visual metaphor of their uniqueness within the city, we'd also give them trees that aren't naturally occurring and have been imported specifically as a demonstration of wealth and power, similar to how the Elvish Dukedom has imported cherry blossoms. These stand in comparison to the willow trees of the dirt districts that are native to the region, or the deciduous trees which make up the main city avenue and later the main city district as a whole, which to me, the lore creator of the city, so it can just be true if I want it to be, but they were imported 50 or so years ago as a government policy, showing the city's growing power along with its ascendance as a hub for international affairs. Having affects that are notably internationally acquired would be one approach we'd go for creating unique blocks for this area, although the real motivation when creating these areas was just creating something that looked different and nice. And like I said, this is definitely sort of just filling up space. It's kind of just like, oh, we're just doing this massive like project. Well, there's this like massive plaza project, and we'll put that guy all the way at the back. How do we want to add to this? Because it's like, that looks good. What if it was like multiple statues all the way down and it's like a statue plaza area? But then we can have like this, like that. Maybe another one. I don't know what this is, but that's kind of interesting. Yeah, I like this little parade of statues. I sort of just finished the sentence at of, then talk about something else. Parade of statues, though, is what I should have said. And I, honestly, still agree with past me. I do like it. It looks cool. Back to the bulk of this district, and as mentioned previously, this block-centric type of design was one I didn't really think I had a good grasp on, a la the market district. But I thought it was honestly working really well, so I ended up extending it out so it went all the way to the Navy base. In regards to the actual housing for the standard housing blocks, I'd use a few different stamp bundles, placing them down somewhat purposefully, somewhat with a free, lithful spirit. The reason I use a few different stamp bundles is to give the town way more building diversity. Using 10 stamps over and over can make it seem really samey, but expanding that out to 20 makes a huge difference. Even more than this, I'll often sidle in a third or sometimes fourth group, but spread them out much more sporadically. This gives the town or city the effect of having a certain style while also giving it those punches of variance, a winning combo in my mind. I should say I don't often use more than 3 bundles because then it loses the effect of having a similar style and becomes more of a hodgepodge, which is sometimes the goal, but it wasn't for this particular city. Another way I add building variations while keeping the style the same is I'll flip the stamps horizontally, then place a bunch, something that makes them way more different than you might think. Once again, this just adds in the sense of a much greater level of variation, a small trick which achieves a lot. As I went back and forth making the fancier houses with their own gardens and the regular housing blocks, I'd also get inspired to add more unique blocks. Oh, this would have been perfect for one of these. You know what, maybe there can be like a full temple section. One of these can have a temple in them, like here. I'm just gonna do that right now. I got the juice for it. I'm gonna go straight to temple. I kind of like the idea of these guys having their own sort of trees. I want to keep the red ones for something else. Let's see if there's like a unique tree that these guys could have. Yeah, I think this is cool. I like the idea of there being a little bit of a jungle out here. There was a mild irony about these unique blocks though, just like the ritzier houses. I had partially added these because I thought they would expedite the map making process. The reality was literally the opposite though. They took much longer than your standard housing block. This is partly because they were more complex, but it was really due to the fact that I was just having a blast making each of these little pockets. Whether it was the garden, the temple, the work mills, the storage area, wherever, I would end up spending much more time on these than the housing blocks simply because they were super fun to create. And this isn't an issue at all. This is obviously great. It's a good thing. The fine details each of these got would add so much to the overall look of the map and really break up the visual monotony that may have come if we just had a mass of the same sort of housing block over and over and over again. More importantly though was my personal enjoyment. I was energized, I was feeling great about the map I was making. So all the time invested was time that flew by, but also time that I think about really fondly. Even more than this, as a delectable cherry on top, I was also learning and practicing new techniques that I could take to future maps, like having manors hedged off with their own gardens. So the area that I was most apprehensive about going into this whole process would become the area I would not only have the best time making, but also would be the part which would make me grow the most as a map maker. Something challenging oneself, something personal growth, something the friends we make along the way, something. With all this said, the housing blocks were still a little lacking. My general question is though, what do I want to do about these? Like these little sections here. I've sort of just filled them with houses. And I think that's fine, but I don't know if it looks great. And I think I'm gonna go with a simple answer, which is like, I think I'm just gonna put a bunch of bushes and trees in between the gaps. So like this. And we'll just see if this like does stuff. Just sort of makes it look a little bit more whole. You know, we could be doing more specific fountains and bushes, or fountains and little garden patches and things, sort of like we've done up here, but for these districts themselves. And I think even down here, this is maybe what we need to employ a bit more. Because as you can see, I've done roads specifically, but it still looks a bit whack. Okay, yeah, I think that's looking much better for both of them. I think these districts look a lot better, and I think these look a lot better. I think just chucking a bunch of bushes and trees, make it very verdant, was the correct choice as far as filling these out, which is good. Bushes and trees, of course! I have a bad habit of somewhat shying away from making towns or cities too covered in nature, because a lot of the time in real life, they just aren't. Or there's just simply a lot more grass patches, which on maps just aren't that engaging. But more and more I've been caring less about realism and have just been overloading these areas with vegetation, which may not be super realistic, but aesthetically looks much better, which is the goal, of course. And hey, if that means your world just has more flora around, then so be it. What's the problem with that? When it came to creating the special elite area, which up until this point had been denoted by just an ostentatiously huge building, I decided to veer away from the district approach like I had considered doing for here previously. Instead, I'd glob onto the style I was enjoying the most, which was the manor properties, making this area a much larger and bolder iteration of the idea. Yeah, wow, Jesus Christ. These buildings are absolutely massive in compared to everything else, but that's fun, I think. Let's get one more building that I think is like of a similar vibe. Ooh, like this. I like that. I like having this little watery temple thing. I wanted it to be more than just one building though, so adding some extras on the map gave it more of a castle grounds feel, and even though it ended up only being 4 buildings, the size and stature of them brings the energy of a unique ecosystem within itself. Combine this with the fun red trees, and this area really stood out as something special. My exact intentions, because although I didn't have any lore or narrative written for this area yet, I knew one thing. It was an area of note, and the people who worked or lived here were also of note, for a reason I'd establish later. And by later, I mean when I'd create the quest for this city. Probably, as I haven't even done that yet, as of now writing this script on the 20th of November 2020, not to time dox myself or anything. Ditching those dorks who have no characteristics or history currently would leave the city altogether and go in the entire opposite vibe, the barren plains outside the city walls. Without thinking too hard about it, I quickly spewed out some hills and willow trees, nothing crazy, and it doesn't need to be. I also accidentally placed the trees and hills at a much larger size than the counterparts inside the city, the reverse of what I did with our initial building placements. Once again though, I'd roll with the punches as I liked the energy that this outside land had. The space beyond the walls is much less livable and a more unwieldy location to build, hence why everyone has avoided it. So even though it was just a map making mistake, because I'm super smart and quick on my feet, I kept it with narrativization that made it correct. I would also go through and add people onto these new districts as I had been doing with all the districts. From the full map zoomed out perspective, you can't really tell, but when zoomed in you can see them, and I do enjoy placing micro detail which when focused on improve the map and make the whole place feel a lot more lived in and alive. This would bring us to the final space on the map. We're gonna do a big park in the middle, and then we'll do this style around the outside. That is what we will do. That is how we're gonna do this. I think that's going to be a good solution and give something a little bit different that doesn't exist in the map, which is, you know, a big park. As I had enjoyed making the manors so much and the space near the water was crying out for some bougie estates, I'd make the waterside block another collection of pristine properties. This also brought the bright green vibrancy and notable housing situation to a different part of the map, leading to more of that ever-desired visual diversity. With the surrounding houses complete, we had one last thing left: the park. We only have one small rectangle left. This small rectangle here is all we have to do. Incredibly exciting. And then I will be done. And then I will be done. We will be done. What a day. As had been a theme, we'd wall off the park because, of course, but then we'd add something which the inside of the city was without: water. Having like all of this be like water, and like this is water, that kind of connects like that, and the path goes over and there's like a bridge. That could be very fun. While I've made parks before, I've never really made a Central Park-esque thing like this before, and I had a lot of fun whipping out some different shenanigans. These included placing a mystery tower on the little island in the middle of one of the lakes, scattering stalls around the park that people can go to, and having the main paths flanked by bushes. Altogether, a really fun area to create, and one I was really happy with. With this, we would finally have finished the map. Okay, amazing. We are done, and boy oh boy, I am so excited to be done. This map took me about 8 hours, and it was just way more than I was ever anticipating. I love it though. I think it's turned out super good, and I think all the different pockets and all the different areas are really exciting. And there's a lot going on here. It's very much become sort of like 7 different towns or cities. Like I've said before, but like these could be their own maps, these could be their own maps, this could be its own city, this could be its own thing, and this, like the park turned out really good. All these like different areas could be sort of their own thing. And then on top of that, we have all these little micro areas like these houses where, you know, really put in the effort to sort of like make them look good or whatever. You know, putting the arches on the map and everything. Like it's very sort of, every area has been fleshed out and been given a lot of detail, and it was very time consuming, but I just feel really satisfied. And usually I do a bit more of an individual breakdown, but for this one, I think I'm just going to say like, I did it. I did it. And boy, do I feel good. So yeah. As is standard practice, after my concluding thoughts, I'd go through, add more details, make a few more tweaks, fix mistakes, but for now, this map was in the books. Until I would continue editing it well off stream when I was making this script. I'm sure I'll do it when I edit the video, and when I go to play it in my campaign, I'll continue editing it. But you know, whatever. But for now, this map was done, and it was truly one for the ages. By far my favorite city map I've ever created. The districting style was something I've been doing a little more recently, but was a major player here, and a really amazing way to have a ton of visual variation, which makes it look so much better, but also was a great way to have much more achievable goals for such a large map, which kept me motivated and feeling good about the whole process. I'm also really proud how we both made areas which have mass producible segments where there's just block after block, mixed supernaturally with smaller micro areas which are carefully handcrafted and help accentuate the artistry of the whole map. If you're keen to use this city map in your own campaign, it's available on Etsy or on the Patreon, which also gets you access to every map I've ever made, along with all the quests I've created for this sandbox campaign. These versions of the map are in 8K, so you can really zoom into any area, soaking up all of the miniature details while maintaining a really high quality, more so than even this video gets across. Subscribe to the channel to see more content like this, join us on the Twitch to help make stuff like this live. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one. Bye!